Good morning. Welcome to SOGCast number 35. This production of SOGCast is brought to you courtesy of Jocko Productions and his technical staff with Echo Charles. And today we're joined by Tech Tom, our top secret technician. We thank you for joining us today. My name is John Stryker-Meyer. I'll be your host on SOGCast, stories about the secret war during the 8-year war in Vietnam. I'm going to turn to a book. By the way, if you haven't seen SOGCast number 33, I recommend going back to read that first or listen to that one first, because this is part 2 of that SOGCast. Where we have today joining us Dale Hanson. Again, Dale, welcome back. And as always, I want to turn to your excellent book, Born Twice. And it's another aspect of SOG that until I interviewed you for SOGCast number 33, I didn't know anything about it. And then even there, this was an operation called Ford Drum. That's Ford like the car, drum like something you beat on. And this was a top secret mission where pilots went out with some people from staff, from Intel staff, back at Platoon at Command and Control Central. And I want to talk about running into your missions where people are now familiar with how many other times you've confronted death on the ground on a combat mission with SOG. And this one here, you were flying low, and they had 2 aircraft for these 4 drones. There'd be one aircraft low with a camera, which you had, and there'd be another aircraft above helping you spot potential targets or areas that you would, and then when you got together, that intel would be turned over right away. And it's something I never heard about. So this is, you were riding, and this was your, again, I'm reading from Born Twice. On my 3rd or 4th flight, I had nearly a full bag in one hand. And this is a full bag of puke. Because the flying is so, I don't want to say erratic, but very rough to avoid being shot at. So you had your one bag of puke, and you banked for a photo, and several green tracers entered my window inches from my face, and the bullet exited the other window. I flinched and squeezed the bag and was back to square one. In other words, you squeezed it, the puke you tried to catch was out. In time, I mastered the malady, but still, I often did not eat breakfast when our missions involved a particularly hot target. And again, you're flying, the green tracers come through inches of your face. So that day and time, aside from throwing up all the time because of the extreme pilots, take us back a little bit about when you were introduced, or maybe just talk about that incident, and then come back to Ford Drum, because, like I said, until I interviewed you for SOGCast number 33, I never heard about it.
Yeah, this was my second tour, and then there was one more tour, 3 tours. But
right.
On this particular one, I was working in the S2, debriefing teams and briefing them, getting them ready. And there were only 2 or 3 or 4 of us who ever did the 4 drum missions. They were super secret. Much of the compound didn't know it existed even. But in that one particular morning, we had a guy who was flying his first mission, and he got shot out of the sky. The bullets went through. He went through an area twice, which was something you didn't do. And the 12-7 bullets went through the fuselage, got him in the head, and he died. And it was also right after our camp got shot up with the sappers and all that. And so basically I told the CEO, I said, I'll take his place. And I started doing the missions as well for Drum. Normally we had 2 planes. There'd always be one of our SOG people in the backseat, and our job was to take pictures and so forth of the enemy, looking for intelligence. And at some point, we actually were so effective that the information we could get obviated the need of sending in a recon team to do it. But we had one plane at 5,000 feet, The
and
other
and
one
the
would be
BDA would be a bomb damage assessment.
that would be a BDA, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and other ones as well. And the other one would be at 50 feet, and the upper one would steer us toward a target, and then we would get 50 feet, sometimes below the trees, and the plane would tip sideways just to get between the trees and stuff. And
Whoa.
it was almost solid aerobatics a lot of times, and I was sick half the time. I was pretty worthless. I'd have the camera in one hand, which you squeezed it once, and it would go bang, 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 tick, picture after picture. And I'd have my little car 15 out the other window because I still wasn't quite sure I wanted to just take pictures, you know. And but anyway, it was so rough and stuff. I would get really sick, and I'd puke out the window. Well, that didn't work. It would throw it right back inside the airplane. And then I thought, well, I'll fill up the bag and throw the bag out the window, and that didn't work for the same reason. So what I would do is I'd be puking in the bag and looking for intelligence and all that stuff. And when the bag got half full, I would tie it off and put it on the floor, and I'd be okay. So here I was just getting ready and getting my aerobatic stomach all ready again. And boy, the bullets came through my window, and I could just see the green tracers going right past my eyes and out the other door. And boy, I had one hand underneath the puke bag and one on the top of it. And I flinched, and it squished the bag, and all this stuff went flying. But after a while, I got to where I could no longer become so sick, you know, and I could control it and stuff. And actually, I take pictures, and we were so low over a lot of targets and flying right over enemy people that you could recognize if it was somebody I knew on the ground, I would be able to recognize who that person was. And we were that close. And
wow.
Yeah. And hopefully when we were going between the trees and stuff, they didn't hear the plane engine because of the foliage. And all of a sudden we'd be right over it, and I'd be clicking the pictures. So by the time they got the rifle up, you know, they would be shooting, and it would be behind us. And but it took a while, and it was extremely effective. We did bomb damage assessment and tried to find truck parks and so forth. And we had our own air.
As soon as you found it, then you would get the word to Hillsborough or Moonbeam for tactical air to come back and hit it, or send in the Hatchet force.
Right. Yeah. Or just plain look for intelligence and follow the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it would be bombed, and we would look for, well, are they deviating the trail and so forth.
So what's your time frame here? Second tour of duty, you're at Platoon. This is 1970?
Yeah, probably early 70.
Early 70, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to get the time frame set, because first tour of duty, second
69.
tour of duty is where we are right now.
Yeah.
And you'll come back. Well, we'll get back to that after we get back with this. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I just want to get the context.
Yeah, but they were so effective, and not very many people did them. Maybe a half a dozen total in the entire war ever flew these missions, and we had our own little Air Force of pilots.
And they were called?
Well, we called them SPAF pilots.
Right.
And that stood for Sneaky Pete Air Force. And they called themselves the Headhunters. And great people, dedicated, and doubly dedicated because what we did was so secret and so valuable. Double dedicated because nobody, even their own other pilots, didn't know what they did.
Yeah.
They were dedicated to us. They were unsung heroes in the sense that it's probably the most dangerous things that they ever did.
And again, just so I forget if we said it earlier or not, but you were flying in basically A1s with a pilot's up front seat. You're in the second seat in the back.
Right.
And so this also part of the training. The pilots at some point wanted to train you all, so anybody in the back seat, in the event that the pilot got shot or was incapable of flying, you or any back seater would be able to take over the aircraft, because
Right.
I'd never heard that part either.
Yeah.
And so here's a Green Beret. With, I don't know if you had any flight experience or not, other than us going through training with helicopters and whatever. So tell us a little bit. So let's assume. And then I want to get back to the book after you go through some general training on that.
Yeah, we had the pilot in the front, and then we were in the back, and it was very cramped. I always wore my web gear, it was almost moot whether I would be able to move around with the camera and so forth.
That tight.
But I would see the pilot in front, and I always wondered if he got killed, we're hung. We're in dead trouble, But he said all is not lost, because they had a pipe from where his controls were. It was just a hollow middle pipe that went through the floor all the way down through the back seat. And in the back, there was a hole in the right about where my feet were. And off to the side, there was a pipe. And if we were quick, we could grab that pipe and screw it into that hole. And then I could use the same ailerons and up down as he had.
Yeah.
And if I reach forward, I could get a throttle, but I have to really know where it is and reach forward.
Pretty important.
Yeah. But then if we had a crosswind or anything like that, we had none. No way to compensate. So what we figured out, we had to figure this out ourselves. The only way to compensate,
the Special Forces guys riding with the Air Force in their bird dogs.
Because when I came on, the other guy in the back seat was killed. He was shot, really? And so we thought, well, the next time it could just as easily be the pilot.
Yeah.
And if he's wounded, he wants to get back and so forth. So we had to come up with some way that we could fly the plane from the back seat. And so we had this pipe. If I was fast and I could control my emotions, I'd screw it into that pipe, reach forward for a throttle. And if we had crosswind or something, we had no ability to control the tail. So what we decided we would do is we would use the door. And if I needed to compensate for drift, I'd push the door open. Yeah.
If you want to go left, push the door to the right.
Yeah. So and that's all we could come up with, And so we would practice. We did it first on pieces of paper, and I think I mentioned in the book. When I got with the pilots, we decided we're going to learn this. And I got a guy from the South, Alabama, Oklahoma, something like that. And he was going to teach me. He was looking for something to write on. And there was a poster up on top. It was the one from Apocalypse Now. And we pulled that down. We wrote on the back of it. And he showed me the shape of a wing and why a wing wants to
the dynamics
raise.
Of the aeronautical dynamics.
Yeah, Bernoulli's principle and all the rest of it, And so we practiced on that. Then we looked at what parts of the airplane would do what we wanted it to do. Then we went out to the airplane, and I sat in the pilot seat, and I would practice. And, okay, you want to bank left? We'd practice that. Then the next thing was to do it from the back seat, and we would practice that.
So you got a little practice at least.
Little bit.
Because what I like to do is to go back to your well-written book, again, Born Twice.
Yeah.
And so on this occasion, you're flying. Captain Arnold is the pilot, and you're flying. You've already thrown up. You've taken care of that. You've taken some pictures, and you're in the middle of some communication with the high plane, and the high plane says, "You're taking heavy fire from the tree line. Watch it, watch it." Arnold's voice, your pilot, came back, high-pitched and full of dread. "Yeah, I got the tracers coming at me and, I'm hit. Arnold slumped forward with his chest against the yoke. The nose of the plane pitched forward and we began to dive. Electricity shot through me. The ground and the side of the mountain was fast approaching. "Hey, Arnold, Arnold!" I shouted as I slapped him on the back. His head lolled to one side, and his arms hung limp. I looked again and saw the ground continue to close with the plane, and realization hit me. The pilot is dead. It took only a moment for it to sink in that Arnold was leaning against the yoke and putting us into a dive. With both of my hands, I grabbed his collar, yanked him on the side, glanced through the window. The ground was closing with a blur. I grabbed the pipe and tried to jam it in to the tube on the floor as we had done when we trained. My hands were shaking, and the bar bounced all around the tube, and I couldn't fit it in. "Calm yourself," I shouted in my head, and willed the pipe into the tube. My eyes wanted to tear when I felt the pipe fit into place. I glanced through the window. Individual branches of trees appeared. I pulled back on the stick, and let out a long breath of air as the Cessna came out of the dive and we leveled. I gave it throttle, raised the nose, gained altitude. My heart slammed against my chest as trees shrank to shrubs below us. Adrenaline pumped through me. My heart pounded in my ears, but I felt I was in control for the moment. Enough time for the plane to guide us back. "Nice job," a voice said over the headset. "Nice job. Nice wake up, Arnold." Tap him on the shoulder. I stared at the headset. Someone was shouting. I looked up. Arnold was looking back at me, unwounded and quite alive. "Nice job, Yankee. I guess we would have survived that one," he smiled. "Welcome to Headhunters." Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the situation that had you been shot. This is some of that realistic training. And again, the intel that you all were able to capture from those type of missions.
Yeah. Talk about shaky fingers. We all get nervous and so forth in combat and stuff, and we control ourselves. But when you're trying to put a little pipe into a hole in another pipe on a diving plane, and you're scared to death, and it's vibrating as well, and you're trying to get that shaking tube into a hole in another tube, that is scary.
Indeed.
Yeah, and I gotta say too, that there were so many other, 2 or 3 other guys, Mike Buckland, Ted Wisrick, and a couple other guys who flew more missions than I did. I don't want to diminish them. They stuck with it for a long time and did mission after mission. And it was a pretty hairy thing when you went over there, when you're 30, 40, 50, 60 miles away. At one point, and I think it was Ted Wisrick, we were so far behind enemy lines doing the 4 drum missions that we were almost at the end of gas range, and they actually flew over Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia, which at that time was the headquarters for all communist North Vietnamese armies. And they actually flew over Angkor Wat and came back. So that's the extent of one of our missions. They're very scary.
When you landed at Khartoum, your second tour of duty in 1970, this operation, had been going on for a little while.
Just a little while, yeah.
Then you get recruited for it, and then that was one of your key jobs there. And again, your MOS was intelligence.
Right.
And so you brought a critical component, whereas people like myself and other guys would get to Vietnam as a commo guy, they wouldn't know some of the little finesses. Like, for example, when on our first SOGcast, you talked about how as an intelligence officer, after an ambush, when you killed 2 Chinese officers who later would turn out to be a great intel scoop, one of the historic scoops by SOG, you did something I never would have thought of, nor did we train for at FOB1, which was to take the clothes and the boots off of the dead Chinese. And everything that you captured, you put it in the bags and brought it back for analysis, because there's detailed analysis that could be gained from things like that. So you're an intelligence officer, and what other aspects? So when you come back, you get trained up for this, you get the mission briefing, then once you gather that intel, it goes to CCC, then it goes back to MACV-SOG headquarters, Saigon?
Yeah, some kind of or even Langley or something like that. But if let's just say the person we killed was shot in the stomach, we would even try to collect stomach material, and they would say what the person had for lunch, where the food was grown, if the man was healthy, and so forth. They would analyze the blood on the person.
Really?
Yeah. They could even look at the sweat in the clothing. We would gather the clothing. They'd say, this is cotton. It was grown in some place. The ammunition was made in Czechoslovakia or something like that. And they would have a whole idea in the whole world how they were supplied and so forth, and how they were brought up. So you mentioned, taking the clothing of the Chinese colonels.
Yeah.
Imagine being totally under fire, 30 miles behind lines. I'm wounded already. First of 3 times.
Yeah.
And here we are undressing this guy. We've taken his satchel and found all the intelligence in it.
And money.
And the spy a list that he had where he was going to pay off all the agents and
Right.
the top secret orders and stuff. And then we're taking the time to take his web gear, his pants, his clothes, and all of that kind of thing, put it in a satchel. In the meantime, we're being shot at, and the bullets or the rounds are exploding in the trees and so forth.
Man.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's just so that's a key thing about how you got this job, and the people that were flying the special forces people in SOG that were flying that mission. So then, when did Ford Drum end? Were you there for a part of that, or had you returned home by that time?
I don't know when it ended because I went into the company. I went into a Mike Force from there.
Mike Force or Hatchet Force?
They're almost synonymous. Mike Force, Hatchet Force, Reaction Force. Yeah.
Guys in Mike Force are arguing. That's
yeah.
good.
Yeah. Mike Force is usually attached to the B team, and Hatchet Force is usually to the.
Well, Jack Tobin had a perfect description.
Okay.
Jack Tobin, who ran missions with Mike Force years ago, he said, "You saw guys, you recon teams, you go in, you snoop and poop.
Yeah.
You look around, and you want to just go home, take some pictures, and do an intel report.
Yeah.
But if you get in a firefight, you'll defend yourselves." Now, Mike Force, we went out to hunt those little commie fuckers.
That's right. That's right.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
And a Hatchet Force was the platoon, company-size elements that we'll get into a little bit more, and we get into that the second part of your book about your third tour of duty, and then what happened. So I don't want to blend it here, but so from flying in Ford Drum, then you're also going to your Mike Force or a Hatchet Force. And what happened there? Were there many missions from that point, or did you wrapped up, went back, and then?
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to tell when the two tours
Sure.
and they kind of merged because no leave in between, but someplace in between. I left Fort Drum, and I think when the A teams were being Doc Peck, Doc Siang were being under siege, Ben Het was just finished, and seeing our heroic people, a dozen Green Berets and a 100 or 200 Montagnard tribesmen holding off a couple thousand. I almost felt guilty.
Right.
At the end of the day, going home to a hot meal and a warm bed, and I just wanted to get back on the field. And so I went back and joined what we called Reaction Force. It was actually just Company A.
Sure.
Of SOG, on the CCC.
Yeah, because you had Company A, was yours. Company B, which later in 1970, September, did Operation Tailwind
Right.
under Captain Gene McCarley, which we talked about in another SOGcast, and then C Company. Now, I'm not familiar because I've interviewed guys from Pontoon, but I was never there.
Yeah,
And
we never had
how different.
Yeah, we never had a C Company, and I gave some of the intelligence briefing for Tailwind. So when they were going out in the field, and I was still in the intelligence briefing, debriefing teams, and all that.
And again, sometimes your units at Pontoon did do in-country missions, and we talked a little bit about that in the first SOGcast. And here again, part of this, there's these two major A camps, as well as Ben Het, which we talked about. But again, you guys were there, and you had a section in your book where you had the front seat to a napalm drop, and it had such a, the Air Force pilot comes up, says, "I got some napalm," and you're listening to him talk to Covey, and he gives you the directions, and the answer from the sergeant on the ground says, "We're outside the wire. Put the napalm 50 meters out." And the Air Force pilot goes, "Roger, get your heads down." So you're watching this, and you're writing, "Below, I watched the bombing run of that jet as it passed south to north along the wire. A gigantic ball of igniting white phosphorus rose along the entire west side of the American stronghold. A long volume of gray smoke billowed above the strike. Right on target, Phantom. You got him. About 100 of them. That time. Roger that. What can I do for next? Copy. Your next target is..." But just to see those camps and have that first seat, to see a napalm run so effectively used, that's one of the clear examples of that.
one of the other aspects of what you just read is, I can't remember. I think it was Doc Peck. There were 7 hills on that A camp, and the communists already had 6 of the 7. And
Really?
Yeah, and I think there was 37 dead Montagnard in plastic bags outside the dispensary, and they were on the last hill. And the communists were, of course, making trenches and digging under the wire and all that stuff. And you had an E5 sergeant who's there on the radio, and then the Air Force comes by and he says, "I've got napalm," and the most calm voice I've heard, he says, "Put it on my wire," and I'm only 800 feet above him.
Yeah.
I'm right there, and I can just see all the explosions and everything going on, just right there in the wire. And I can imagine the pressure he's on, and yet he just completely stays calm, and he just put it over my west wire. And I watched the whole field just burst into white napalm and all that stuff. And he answers back as calmly as if he was giving a grocery list. He said, "Okay, now put it over here." And I just admired that E5 sergeant in Carmel, your MOS.
Indeed. Yeah, we called it a couple airstrikes.
Yeah.
But again, so we go to chapter 21, Hatchet Force is the title, and this talks about your return to action. And I enjoyed this chapter because it reflects on your mindset. Now, you've been flying above the fray, and you were writing in chapter 21. It had been on my mind for some time to go back to the field. I do not know why I had this moth-to-flame draw to return to peril when every indication was that our involvement in the war was slowly dying down. I know the attacks on our A camps supplied some of the narcotic. I wanted to be closer. In the battle itself. I didn't want to cheer them on. I wanted to be with them. I wanted to be the sliding mortar rounds down the tube as fast as they could tear off the extra charges. I wanted to study my rifle against the leaking sandbags of a perimeter as I engaged the attackers. I even longed for the smell of adrenaline, of fear that clung to my clothing after the fight. That odor eloquently said, "You are alive." As one of the famous lines in Special Forces reads, "You've never lived until you've almost died. For those who fought for it, life has a flavor the protected will never know." Amen.
That's by John Stuart Mill.
Is that who it put together?
John Stuart Mill.
Okay. Who's John Stuart Mill?
He was a poet and philosopher, I think.
Okay.
I remember one time I think it was on Bright Light or something. Of course, I had nunchako, those karate sticks,
Oh, nunchucks, yeah.
Yeah, and I always carried nunchucks and my buck knife, always, no matter where I went. And I remember I was on Bright Light waiting to go on a thing, and just how you have wars described as hours of sheer boredom followed by moments of terror. And in those times of sheer boredom, I wrote that entire, carved it into the side of my nunchucks by John Stuart Mill. War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling which thinks that nothing is worth war is much worse. A man who has nothing for which he is willing to fight, nothing he cares about more than his own safety, is a miserable creature who can only be made and kept so by the exertions of better men than himself. I carved that entire thing on the sides of my nunchako.
Is that right?
Then follows the sheer terror, the call.
So it also gave you a chance to get back to working, quote, with your little people.
Yes.
And that's just, that's part of that special relationship between Special Forces, which is unique in our training. From to this day, still in any other unit that I'm aware of, where we're trained not only to be special operators with weapons, intel, commo, but also to work with indigenous people, no matter which country, which part of the world we're in, so that we're able to work with them, not just go in and say, we're going to bring the fight. No, we want you to come in, help you do force multiplication, and et cetera, something along those lines. So you also, I can identify that feeling, how you want to get back and you met the little people there. They accepted you, obviously, and you're back on the team. And as you move forward with that, how did that go when you got reassigned? By that time, did you get your 30-round magazine yet?
Got the 30-round magazines.
Okay.
Yeah. They actually started to get more common. Once they realized how important they were, that we could compete with the AK-47. We started getting them quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
But I totally enjoyed the people and stuff. We did our training. The company, as I got into it then, was unique. Normally had 15, 16 special forces.
Well, yeah. I mean, we had the Operation Tailwind. We had 16 SF and 120 Indigenous Troops.
Right. And so
here for your company,
we had 3. There was a captain.
Yeah.
And a first sergeant and myself. And
Sergeant Roberts is the first sergeant, and then Captain Roche.
Roche was the CO, and he took a platoon, and then I took a platoon. So we each had a platoon, and then together we were a force. And I can't remember if I mentioned, but Roche was originally German. It was in the German special forces type. He represented Germany in the Olympics and the biathlon and so forth. And then he came to the United States and was working with us and became special forces.
Yeah, because at that time we had many members of special forces who had come to the United States, joined the military, and became outstanding special forces soldiers.
Right. I don't know if that was the Lodge Act or something else, but.
And you in your book again, you have, after you're introduced to him, because you were a little surprised to learn that only 3 Americans, and your Captain Roach was quite a character. And when he came in to introduce himself, again, he has that Prussian background. I am Captain Roach. 3 of us. That's all we need. My company is a well-oiled machine, and we are professionals. Our people are well-trained and have good discipline. The colonel tells me that you are a good leader speaking to you and a professional soldier, or he would not have sent you to me. He looked at me with blue eyes, then pausing before doing so, offered me his hand. We have 3 platoons in this company, and we have 3 special forces. I, the captain, will take 1 platoon. The first sergeant will take the second. And you, Sergeant Hanson, will be in charge of the 3rd platoon. By way of dismissal, he said, Sergeant Roberts, we'll brief you. Of course, then he walks away.
He walks away, as he did every formation. Walked away.
God. Yeah. He had that old school to him.
Oh, absolutely. All the way to the end. I don't know if you'll get to the thing, but we had this pretty rough mission.
Well, yeah, we want to get into that.
Yeah.
That's the one where you do an RON on the Ho Chi Minh Trail?
Right.
Yes.
And we had 17 encounters with the enemy, shot at or full firefights or
on different
whatever.
missions?
On one mission.
On one mission.
17.
Okay.
And at the end of it, he went straight to the officers' club. The first sergeant went to the Huckleberry Inn bar stool.
Right.
And as normal, I took the platoon. While they were looking to give a briefing to us, they decided that what we had learned was so lucrative. They said, well, we're going to send you back in again tomorrow. And they wanted to have a briefing. So I'm going to go look for the CO, the captain, to tell him we're going to go right back in there. And on the way, I go past the dispensary. And I think, we are so lucky that we didn't have serious wounds out of this. So I stopped by the dispensary and I said, if it's okay with the captain, do you have a medic that you can send with this next mission? And he looks at his roster and he says, yeah, I can give you Backseat Brown.
Right.
And so I didn't want to say, we'll take him because I'm not the CO. So I went to tell the CO, we got a warning order in about 4 hours to go back in there. And I says, I stopped by the dispensary and we can get a medic. And he just came to attention like a Prussian general and looked at me. He says, Sergeant Hanson, you're messing with my war machine. It's just like, nothing to change what it is,
Well, so you did not take the medic.
We didn't have a medic,
But also, just for a brief second, our unique relationship with our Indigenous troops, and you had a line in there where you're talking, actually a good paragraph explaining Ben, B-I-E-H.
Bia, B-I-E-R, B-I-E-R, beer.
Okay, and you also had
Yeah.
B-I-E-H, and one
That's
of.
him.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's him.
Okay, and so we'll say beer for now, even though we got the H. But again, these are indigenous folks,
Yeah.
and if they say, we don't care how they spell it, we just care about how they say it.
Yeah.
So it's beer, and it says, and you're talking about the people that you've grown to have affection with, and also again, the Chinese liked you because they said Hanson never die, and your tribesmen had guarded you with their lives. And one of the people, again, returning to the book, one of my people stands out in my memory. His name was Beer, and as a typical American thing, everyone called him Beer, B-E-E-R. He was shorter than many of the yards and was disfigured in war. Napalm had burned off his upper lip, exposing his teeth. It gave him the aspect of a perpetual snare, a thing that would frighten children in another place. But in a country with decades of war, scars from wounds were commonplace. But the appearance of a snarl did not correctly describe his nature. Beer had a wonderful sense of humor and loved to be with people. He was intelligent, spoke good English, and was one of my shadows on a mission. Beer understood the nuance of a thing and would explain it to the rest of the men. Then over months, you go on to talk about some more experiences. Again, people have got, I recommend getting the book to give you a sense of that camaraderie, the esprit de corps between Green Berets and their indigenous troops that are fighting communism against all odds. And what a man.
Yeah, yeah.
And so earlier, I'm trying to catch up to you in the book here. We're going faster than I thought we would. But you had this mission. So A Company was tasked with a reconnaissance in force of a suspected base area in which there is heavy enemy contact expected. The monsoons were approaching. Air cover could not be counted on to add to the possible dynamics, because our key ingredient when we're in heavy contact, our Air Force or any air assets are always critical to our survival in the field. So on top of going into this big mission with A Company, the monsoons are coming. When the monsoons came, everything stopped. Mm-hmm. The Ho Chi Minh Trail stopped, we stopped, and just filled sandbags to deal with the flooding because it's just so intense with the rain. And so you had a chance to train up. And so on that mission, let's get started where you actually get inserted, how the insertion go, and whereabouts, how deep were you in country, little details about that insert.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the target was. You know, it seems like all of our missions that counted for us either had a target designator or a name. And this one, I don't remember a target designator. Usually they'll say India 6 or Lima 50, or they'll say Halfback 1 or something like that. I don't remember them ever giving us a name or a specific target location, but it was definitely right over the border somewhere because we were right in the middle of a very hot area. And a recon team was just coming out as we were going in. But we were going to look for information, you know, on the enemy, as we always did, and try to interdict forces and so forth. As we were going to do this, we split up the three companies. They gave us two more sergeants to run the mortars, and an extra one with the captain, and then one with the first sergeant, and he would have the mortar people. And so there were five of us now, and then a company of people as we went in. But we went in three groups. The first and the second company, I'm saying that wrong, first and second platoon,
right,
went in on one side of a long strip of land on an LZ that was shaped kind of like an artist's palette. And then where the finger would be in that small spot, I went in with my platoon, and they were going to try to drive the communists across that finger of land to where I was all set up for them.
And that would be set up with claymores.
I'm Claymore nuts. You know,
Indeed.
one Claymore shot 720 pellets the size of buckshot, and the swath was 250 meters long. So, and nothing in front is going to be living or a problem. So I'm big on claymores, so I had several claymores set up and everything, and I set up on. I was the third one in. The other two guys went in first, and then my people went in, and we were just gonna skim the ground and peel off, so the communists wouldn't realize that anyone stopped there. Yeah, of course, part of the problem was that looked like grass, but it was chest high grass, and we just were rolling and falling and half breaking our necks in there. But I had him do a quick recon of the area to make sure the enemy wasn't set up on my side, not his side, And, yeah, and then I found a nice little ridge and set my people up alongside of it and just waited for the push to come through.
How many claymores did you have out?
I think I had 4. I had 4 when I was in recon and I was sitting with my hands wounded.
Yes.
I had 4 in front of me, and then I think I had 2 or 3 machine guns too.
Right.
So I had that all set up, and we were all waiting for them.
Well, and then also, is this the moment where you had a unique a point in time where you described in your book of one of these moments in SOG when you're on the ground, you're in enemy territory, you're anticipating contact, and your little people got their hand grenades, they're out, the pins are pulled, they're all there, and again, returning to the book, Born Twice, you said you were watched breathlessly. We're all anticipating. 20 minutes, nothing happened, but there was definitive movement in the front. A few twigs, small moist ones, parted. Tall grass rubbed together, and was the pathing of something. Something was passing by. I didn't move. I sensed the men behind me tensing behind their weapons. Then a shape emerged. It stopped its movement for a few seconds and moved again. Another shape emerged from the patch of brush and joined the other. It froze in place, and I made out the shapes. They were deer.
It was significant because
no kidding.
They were driving the deer in front of the enemy were. And I had a certain amount of care I had to take too, because in case there were no enemy and the brush that I heard moving in front of me wasn't our own people.
Right.
So I had to make sure I had visual contact and I could really control my people too.
Sure.
But when the deer came through, they didn't look at me and they didn't look at the side. They looked behind them. And I knew the deer were being driven by something. And so all of a sudden, they actually barked. You had the barking deer over there.
Yeah, which I never knew about.
Yeah. Teams have been chased out by these barking deer, thinking they were dogs, But then they did a leap, and they jumped out to the side. And then I started having my people get all ready. And then the grass starts parting, and I could hear a little bit of movement.
Well, let me go back to your book.
Got it. You can do it better than
this
me.
moment said, now, like you just said, the reeds and the ferns were swept aside. There was movement. We could see it. And they were approaching the kill zone of my Claymore mines. Then, at the place the deer emerged from the forest, soldiers in mustard yellow uniforms appeared. I fired my claymores. My people opened up with their weapons. There were shouts, cries of pain. The pop of AK-47s returned our fire on full automatic. But it was a desultory response. We tossed grenades and continued to fire until we received no more incoming. Move it, I shouted. We assaulted the enemy, firing single shot and short bursts where we couldn't see through the brush. Several enemy lie in postures and that only death could produce. One soldier across the chest of another, his eyes and mouth open in surprise, his skin the pallor of a caterpillar's belly. There were no wounded. Near the ambush site was a well-used trail. And so now let's turn to that trail. And what you saw, could you continue to move on? You attacked. Again, our recon tactics were, except for a few other teams that would go in more heavy than ours, we would have our immediate reaction drills would be to move back to get away from the contact. And then we're obviously compromised. Let's think about extraction. But in your case, you just heard him bad, and then you charged. And ended that enemy assault, which is
Yeah.
like, you don't hear that story very often in SOG.
No. And as soon as I ascertained that all the enemy were taken care of and dead or gone, then I backed us up to our ambush positions and waited for the rest of the team to come in. And of course, it's like Captain Roche was the one who calls back, sit rep. He says, I want to know what happened. So
Yeah.
So I said, enemy came through, and I asked, how far out are you? And he said 100 meters, and I said, we won't shoot. So regardless what came through after that, I'm not going to shoot, because it might be our own people. And so they come through, and Roberts yells at me. He says, 12. And I said, 12? I didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
He says, you got 12, and there's 12 enemy dead in front, and
Yeah.
oh, and the sit rep, I says, enemy killed, and I said, they have wounded, and there was a high-speed trail, and I could see that the ground was all torn up like they were running.
Yeah.
And I could see blood on the leaves. One of my Indige pointed on the leaves about chest height. There was blood on the leaves, so I knew they had wounded with them. And of course, I told the captain, and he's right away. He says, "We follow." Right now.
Right.
And his whole mindset, it's combat, it's conventional warfare. Now we're here to kill enemy and win.
Yeah, sure.
So he did the right thing. And of course, you want to do it immediately before they have a chance to set up again.
Sure. And you continue to press into the jungle, and then for that night, when did you finally? The other part of this mission, was it that night that you set up the RON on the Ho Chi Minh Trail?
It was the day after that. So on that night, we had, it was interesting too, but.
Well, you talk about it a little bit, please. Yeah.
Yeah, we sat up and we got probed a few times. On that one, as I recall it, I'm going around checking all my people, making sure they're positioned right and where I want the machine guns and all that. And so one of my Montagnards says, we dig you foxhole, Hanson. We dig you foxhole. And I said, that's great. I don't have to worry about that while I'm doing all the other stuff. And so they dig me a foxhole. And then about the time I finish positioning my people get back, we get hit. And we're hit from the side. It's not heavy, but we're hit.
Yeah.
And the initial thing, since I'm right next to the foxhole, I dive down and I'm coming up. Except my foxhole is only about 1.5 feet deep. It's knee deep, because a Montagnard foxhole, they sit in the foxhole and they sit on their heels, and it's plenty deep for them, but not for an American,
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so we return fire, we overcome them, and we assault the position, and there's 3 dead down there, and then we return back. We set up for the night, and we're already positioned. It's too late to get a new spot.
Sure.
So then toward morning they probe us again, but this time it's RPGs.
Well, yeah. Then also, I mean, again, going back to your book, here's a key thing: people never think about this. It's sprinkled during the night, enough to send shivers up our spines, but not enough that our people would not be alert. And so that's, again, talking about that and writing. You don't think about being cold in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
But in the jungle,
Yeah.
welcome to the jungle, baby. It's different at night.
Yeah, in particular, Khantoum. I'm not sure about your North Country, but it's the Central Highlands, and that's the Highlands, and they have mountains 4,000 or 5,000 feet.
Same in Laos,
Yeah.
further north.
Yeah, and it's ice cold and frost sometimes.
Well, yeah, my coldest time in Vietnam was the DMZ in December of '68. God, it was cold. We had to cling together for body heat.
Mm-hmm.
We were socked in and couldn't move. And then while you're there, you're getting back to the book again. They were cooking, and the enemy were economists there had been fires burning, and this was the area that you guys were hitting.
Mm-hmm.
So the economists, you're up early. You guys move out. You hit the enemy base camp, excuse me, or some sort of an encampment.
Right.
And they're cooking breakfast.
Yeah, this is This is the next day.
Yes.
And we get, and it's after we sleep on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, because we find the trail finally. That there was a recon team before us, and he told us about this high-speed trail. And the way it was described, it was hard-packed clay and able to move trucks,
Yeah.
And as I got there, it was hard-packed clay, not a speck of vegetation. I thought in my mind 2 elephants could go abreast full of gear and walk down it, or trucks. And of course, the captain is looking for a fight. It's a little different than recon. He wants a fight.
Oh,
you know.
yeah.
And Roberts told him that we used, back in the old days, they used to stop right on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and actually one of our recon guys did that too. Walker, Joe Walker.
Joe Walker.
Yep, he had a heavy recon team. He went right on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, got to a bunker, wiped out the bunker. He says, we sleep here, and he slept in the bunker on top of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we were doing the same thing. He thought, well, the Roberts was saying that, in the past, we stopped all traffic that way. And Captain Roche thought, that's a kind of a good idea. Let's do it.
This is on the spur of the moment in Laos on the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Yeah, we camp here, and so we and there's a fork in the road, and so it's like, my spot actually wound up right at the junction between the three, and so I'm curled up in a poncho, and I'm thinking, if I don't get shot tonight in the RON, I'm going to get run over by a communist truck. It's thick.
Oh my gosh! So then, so you get through the night without any contact?
There was twice. I heard shots once, and then the communists hit one of our trip flares, but it was far enough down the road, and whoever was on that element on the end didn't have anything to shoot at, so there was no return fire, but they were there, and that was about it.
So is that where the enemy broke contact and retreated down the road?
Yeah.
And the 3rd platoon was moved out, and then at some point, we assaulted with a fast walk, nearly a run, our backpacks, shoving the air from our lungs with each footfall. Equipment jostled noisily, straps and buckles scraped and clacked in time with each trudging. You're going full force against these guys, chasing. I mean, I love it because you're chasing the enemy.
If we would have continued on that road, they surely would have had an ambush for us because we had fires with them.
Right.
But as I'm sitting there on the fork of the road, I noticed, pristine day, and my people are going to cook and all that stuff. And I look down the valley, down that one side road, which is also very heavy. And as I'm looking, I'm seeing the smoke arise, but like fog coming up.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it occurs to me, fog is white or blue, and I'm looking down here, and I said, that's not fog, that's smoke. And I'm looking down there, and then I can smell something. And so I put one of my Montagnards in charge and go tell the captain. I says, come here, I think we found a base camp. And so he runs over there, and he's all excited. He's speaking more German than ever, and and via assault now, And then the matter is how do we go down the road, because they surely heard us and they should be waiting, and then the other alternative is go through the woods. Well, if we went through the woods, we couldn't use the mortars because of the trees, And
you're double, triple canopy there.
Yeah, and I was telling the captain, I said, if we go through there, it'll slow us up, they'll hear us, and we can't use our mortars to support us. So he says, "V, go right down the road, right down." And we did, and...
Again, he did this. Your book, we were advised by the FOB to avoid contact if possible until the following day. And your captain goes, "V, go down the road."
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. So we we don't run after, we don't charge like TV,
Yes.
But as fast as you can walk, because I want to give them as less time as possible to set up, Of course, the captain's in charge, but I think I was second group, and Roberts was in the back that time, I think. But anyway, we make our way down, and I must have been toward the front, because I'm looking down there, and the first guy I see is the source of the smoke. He's a cook. He's got this gigantic cauldron, and he must have it's almost like a boat oar. He's cooking all this rice, and he's stirring it, and he looks up, and he stares at us. He doesn't know what
it didn't register with him mentally that he's
there's
looking at a solid guy.
Certainly no enemy here, and he looks up, and all of a sudden he drops that oar, that big stir stick, reaches for the rifle, and we pop him there, and then start the assault right off the bat there.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How did the assault go from there then?
Good. We just, I went through, it turned out that to the right side in that base area, there was an entire encampment with bunkers, trenches, sandbagged bunkers, and all that stuff. That's the part I got. So my people assaulted that. And then off to the left side and continuing on was bungalows on stilts, which I think was their officers and cadre and all that stuff. So the rest of the people went that direction. And I remember as we started popping the mortars, that some of those bungalows started collapsing on the stilts, and they were half down. And I could see the enemy feet running on the backs. I could see their feet underneath, and they were all taken off in the woods. They probably didn't get their guns in time.
Right.
And then I assaulted the bunker complex, which was as well designed and made as any American we would ever make. You know,
is that right?
Yeah, and we just jumped in there and threw our grenades and all that stuff and assaulted the whole thing. And whoever was in there ran out the backside, and we essentially captured the whole camp with almost no casualties.
So you also got weapons and intelligence documents out there.
Yeah, and I think every single place that we fought, when I took out 12, when I took out 3, and so we kept gathering weapons. And they would drop the weapons and run, and I would collect them. And my people were getting kind of encumbered with weapons. They had their own and rucksacks, and they got all these enemy weapons too.
Right, sure.
Yeah,
that's a different aspect.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So and then your good captain doesn't give up. Now he changes his tactics to come back and set up an ambush.
Yep.
Assuming they're going to come get you.
Yep.
Captain Roach goes, V set up an ambush? Something like that. I'm sorry. I'll just take a little literary license.
Yeah, and I'm not good on accents either. And so he decides where he's going to do is where we were on the road in the first place before we went down. And they're going to work down there until they find the enemy, and then they're going to do a major attack with the 2 platoons.
Right.
And they're going to push them through the trees down to where I am at the camp. And so I spread my people along kind of the edge of the ridge line. There's kind of a depression, so there's a natural place for me to set up my people. So I got my platoon there. I put up a couple warning sites behind me because I don't want those guys that ran away to come back behind me. So I got some early warning places behind me. I set up some people back there.
Toe poppers or just people?
People.
Okay.
Because I want to know what's back there.
Sure.
And so the rest of us set up, and I kind of knew where, if I were the enemy and I was running from them, where I would be wanting to go. And I set up my machine guns and so forth there. And then it starts shooting up there. Pretty hefty firefight, big firefight up above, and
well, so before you get too far away from the camp invasion here, you have another first. A company at CCC had what had to be another SOG first. Let me just get to the point here. Because, as you said, you killed the cook. He knocked over the cauldron. And so some of the little people of your team from the Hatchet Force, they walked to the fire, scooped up rice and Napalm with their cups, returned to their positions, and it was sticky rice, and they ate it with their fingers. You may have been the first Hatchet Force to eat a meal courtesy of the NVA.
Yeah.
You ate their food.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because my Montagnards, they would go back and they got handfuls of this and whatever they could put the rice on, and they went to my assigned position that I gave them. So they were obeying me. But as they passed, they took a bunch of rice.
Sure.
Well, the captain saw that, and he thought that's a derelict in their orders and stuff, and he was going to discipline them. And so I tried to intercede, and so what I said is, "Oh no, Captain, they're trying to put Napalm on their breath." So the enemy.
Napalm, for anybody who knows, that's the sauce that the Vietnamese put on everything.
Yeah.
And it's delicious. Sometimes it's a little funky. Sometimes it's a funky monkey. You're not sure what it is, but it's Napalm. And so you come to their aid with that. Sir, I think they're putting Napalm on their breath as the enemy will smell them coming and think they are friendlies.
Yes. And I gave them some excuse not to be so martial,
Creative thinking, Sergeant.
Yeah.
Well done. Okay, so moving forward from there, you get more firefight. How'd that go for the rest of the day then? Did you get to trigger the ambush?
No. Okay, the enemy is now being pushed at me, and they're really, really close. I can hear the brush and stuff because they're yelling and shooting and fighting, and I can tell by the battle is moving. They're still up on the road though, and I could tell that the return fire is getting closer and closer to me, and finally it stops, and they're starting to get to where I'm just about ready to blow what's left of my claymores, get my people going, and all of a sudden I hear this yelling, shouting and yelling, and it's like my people would never do that. They wouldn't blow an ambush, and I hear this yelling, and I turn to my side, and there's two Vietnamese officers that I never saw before. And
South
Vietnamese, yeah, and
Not
they're on the radio, and they're screaming into the radio, and they're doing one of three things. They're either shouting so that the NVA wouldn't hear it and go somewhere else, so they wouldn't have to be in a fight, or they were collaborating with them and giving them warning, or they were ignorant. One of those three. The only thing,
or a combination of 2 and 3.
Yeah, and so I went shh shh. I'm trying to get them to be quiet without me shouting, and I said, shh, shh. And they look up like I'm an ant. Who's this guy? And I went, shh, shh. And they still would start yelling. So I started throwing sticks at them, and I threw rocks at them, and they looked at me like they were irritated. And so I ran over there, and I grabbed his radio, and I threw it over the embankment. And I knew that when my back was turned, they probably would shoot me.
Yeah.
And so I pointed at one of my people, and I says, I pointed at my eyes and looked at them, and I watched them, And I went back to my place where I could watch my people, and sure enough, the people that were being driven to me were going the other way. They blew the ambush. And I looked back, and I got this circle of people. My little Montagnards are protecting me. They got a circle all around me with the guns out. And protected me from the South Vietnamese.
And so as this progressed, that little incident, some point you're saying, Zen Loy, I'm sorry about that, so and soon. But you go a few hundred more yards, and then you talk to your little people.
Yeah.
And you ask them, what are they saying? And the voice said, VC said, killed Americans to kill Montagnards.
Yeah.
So those guys, even though we're South Vietnamese, so how did they get in there in the first place? Was it some kind of a resupply?
Yeah, when we overran the village, we had a couple of wounded we needed to get out, and then it was a good chance for me to get the guns and all that stuff that we captured out. And I think what happened was that they came in on that chopper, and I think when the captain saw those two Vietnamese, he dumped them on me. And he didn't tell me. He just didn't want them with him. And he dumped them on me. Whoa. And there they were set up. And I never even saw them until they started shouting in the radio. Yeah. And then before, as you were reading there, the captain got engaged again with more fighting up there. And he called on the radio. He says, it was Hanson, but I don't remember my call sign. But he's basically third platoon, and I gave my call sign. It was Swede. I said Swede, and he says, "Get up here, help us. We need help." And the two companies or two platoons were being overrun, and so on the way I said, well, it took them 2 hours to get to where they were. And so I gathered up all my people. I pulled in my outposts, and we didn't run it, but we went just about that fast. Oh, no kidding. And my people were so exhausted when we got up to where the road was. They could hardly talk. They were puking. They were tired. Really? They could hardly lift their feet. It took me 15 minutes to get there. It took them 2 hours. So, and when I got up there, I was under fire. I got rockets and mortars coming on me. Just boom, boom, boom all around me.
Yeah, and I yelled at together now.
Yeah, and I yelled at the sergeant who was in charge of the mortars. His code name was Spanky, and I said, "Spanky, the Swede," and he come across. I said, "Your mortars are right on top of me." I said, "Stop," and he says, "We're not firing anything," and so we were being fired by the NVA. But my people were so tired, and this is kind of an unthinkable thing, perhaps. But I gave them 10-minute break. And we just sat there under the mortars, I said, they're worthless. They can't even walk. They're so tired.
Yeah.
And I gave them a break. And as soon as I decided they were on target and not around me, because they were looking, they weren't exactly sure. And as soon as they got us zeroed in, I was going to take off. But gave them a 10-minute break under mortar fire, and we sat on the highway, and they puked, and they had their cramps and all that stuff. And finally, I gave them the 10 minutes. I said, let's go. And we joined the company at that point. And then Captain Roche was just amazed that we had got there so quick. He thought it would be another hour and a half anyway.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's the key point. You're able to turn that battle around, and
It
that
did.
part of it.
It turned it around.
One of your 17 contacts with the enemy on that mission.
Yeah. So, and then he decides we're going to assault. They're down the hill, actually, and they're assaulting upward. And what the captain decided was a kind of a good idea. All three of our platoons would get together, and we do 1 minute of solid fire, full automatic, and everything we had, mortars, everything, for 1 solid minute. And when the 1 minute ended, then my platoon was going to assault. And we did that, and coordinating was the first thing. When to start, make sure everybody knew we were on, so they weren't still shooting when I'm down below,
Yeah.
And that 1 minute was over. I assaulted with my people, and we took out some more NVA in that charge, but there were dead people all over the place. And the interesting thing was that there would be mortar tubes and machine guns empty of people. They would take off and leave them, or they would be slumped over on top of them. So they took off on a run, and we won at that point. Wow. But I told the captain when he finally linked up, and he just stayed up on the road. I said, we have lots of weapon, and lots of enemy killed. We need to get the weapons because they were valuable, cruiser weapons and stuff. And he says, Sergeant Hanson, bring them up here. And I said, there's no way we could chase them because They threw away all their weapons, their rucksacks, their rifles. They're just running, with just clothes on. And there's no way we could catch them, And so when I told him that, he said, bring up all the gear. And that's what we did.
Well, then at some point, this all settles down, and you see the 2 Vietnamese officers who you threw rocks at and who were telling them to kill Americans and to kill the Montagnards. They're up there talking, and you're getting ready to go address them or at least talk to Roach. And then this is a bitter side of this politics. We always talk about politics, but here in your book, you described how the 2 lieutenants were there, and Sergeant Roberts comes up and puts his hand on your shoulder and says, let me talk to you about this.
Yeah, because he could see I was a bantam rooster. I was ready to go nail him. And I could. Those 2 lieutenants were talking to the captain, pointing at me and looking at me. You knew they were ticked off at this guy who threw the radio over the embankment and didn't say, sir,
Indeed.
And so Roberts gave me the reality check there.
Yeah, but the reality check, this is the thing. The way you write it, and again, going back to the book, he goes, listen to me. I'm going to give it to you straight. Those 2 lieutenants, the South Vietnamese, who were on the radio yelling out loud to kill Americans and to kill the VC, we didn't talk about that. I'm sure they didn't tell that to the Captain Roach. Mm-hmm. Says the 2 lieutenants could get you transferred from CCC. It is called Vietnamization. Remember, it is the government's plan that the Vietnamese take over the war. When we get back to camp, those 2 officers will take credit for this whole operation. The record will show their great courage and leadership it took to destroy this place. And our people, including our captain, will affirm that this is so. I looked at Roberts, then at the Vietnamese, then back to Roberts. He was right. If the mission was Vietnamization, then the report must affirm that it was working. America was accomplishing its own mission. It galled me. Time for me to grow up on this one, I thought. Unbelievable.
Yeah. And the other thing that Roberts had mentioned to me, too, was that he says in the morning there will be a letter from or Sergeant Hanson indicating their great courage and all that stuff. And he says, and you'll sign it. He says, you don't have to write it. We'll do that for you. Or they'll do that for you, and you'll sign it, and those Vietnamese, of course, wouldn't diminish your reputation because that would diminish this great letter that I wrote and didn't write, really.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's Vietnamization. And the last year of the war, we had to reflect that they were able to take over the war so that Americans could leave it.
Good God. And then when that point in time came, the men who were false heroes proved they weren't. Mm-hmm. And that's part of that class, particularly in that area.
Yeah.
So getting down to near the end, you were talking about at the end of your third tour of duty. Mm-hmm. So what was your third tour? Because I think you said you
just overlapped
the second
into it.
And the third, they overlapped.
Yeah.
Okay. And so now it gets to that point in time that everybody faces, and you're now getting ready to leave camp. Mm-hmm. And again, this whole relationship between you and your little people, and then also I want to get to that one point where you were mentally going through what was going to happen here, and how you had to leave them behind, and how that impacted you. And in your book, you were talking to you were talking to a Mrs. Olson.
Yeah,
near the end.
The last chapter. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I'm at the last chapter now, and Mrs. Olson was from back in Minnesota days.
It would be Minnesota. Yeah. Yeah, and
but this thought came to mind. And yes, and so you're talking to her, and what she said. What was it that she said that hit you so hard?
This thing about your life isn't worth what you contribute to life, to include the sacrifice our people made in the war and so forth.
Right.
Nobody's going to even know that we did it. And of course the illustration that she gives is pretty significant. She's in a hospital bed. I don't know if that's what you wanted to read, but she's in a nursing home bed, and her mind goes back and forth, but she's looking at me as I'm visiting her.
Yeah.
And she says, you know what? You don't know anything about death and life, she says. And I said, yes, I do. I mean, certainly we do. And she says, you know what your life is? And she says, you go outside to that pump. That she's thinking a hand pump in her memory.
Yeah.
And you pump this cup.
Water pump.
Yeah, water pump. She says, you go out there and you pump this cup full of water. And she says, then you put your finger in that cup. He says, that cup of water is the world and all the people around you and so forth. He says, the finger is you. And he says, you pull that finger out and nobody knows you were ever there.
Whoa.
Yes. And so significant. But as a Christian, thinking of life after, and as you and I and the rest of us in Special Forces, the sacrifices we made for our posterity and so forth, we know it was a sacrifice, and we did have something that's lasting that we left behind, although so many of our Special Forces guys never got the recognition, the heroism, all the rest.
Yeah, because we couldn't talk about it for 20 years. We all signed the NDAs.
Yeah, but in our minds we want to think that when our life is over, we left something that was lasting and worthwhile.
Right, and you had a couple of excellent paragraphs in your last chapter as you wrapped up the book, and you were thinking about Mrs. Olson, and you're thinking about what she said, and your response to yourself was, what we did know, or what we did was known to God, if no human being ever took notice. I know several SOG heroes who, without any fanfare, returned to their hometown and quietly raised families. They found work as janitors in the local school and pushed a dust mop along the halls, cleaned slop off dining tables, and after hours set up chairs around the stage for school functions. The lights never shined on them. They never took a bow. No newspaper ever mentioned their names. They would retire, grow old, and die, their finger finally leaving the tin cup as well. And only then, when the town read the obituary, would they discover the sacrifice and heroism of the quiet janitor they quietly noticed as he swept the hall. Some of our guys needed the quiet after our war, and they found a spot along a river in a remote place in Alaska, or the Olympic Forest, or on an island in northern Minnesota. They built a cabin on a dog named Shep, and were the uncle the family knew little about. Some of ours were accomplished. One buck sergeant who ran recon became a 4-star general. One of us was the owner of Walmart, John Walton. Others were elected to office. Some were accomplished in other ways. I just think that's a fitting statement about a lot of our guys that were soldiers, went to war, and came back and returned quietly to life without any fanfare.
Right. There's I started the book with a biographical note that kind of ties exactly what you just said together and those anecdotes. But when I was a young boy, and my next door neighbor, old people, Osmer and Ada Pettis, lived in a tiny little log cabin, tiny, 4 small rooms. And one day, and I was still a little boy, a lady came to their house, and she was obviously from the big city, from Minneapolis. And she came in there, and her hair was dyed blonde, and it was frizzled like corn husk, thick, dry, spindly, and frizzled on the end. And she was smoking steadily, and her knuckles were just dark brown. And she came in there, and she had a big white belt. And she came in, and she had every look of affected sophistication. And her mother, whose child it was that just came in from the big city, her mother says, "That's a beautiful belt." And she tells her mom, "Yeah, I made that myself." She says, "I collect gum wrappers, the silver part of gum wrappers." And she says, you can fold them a certain way and fold them together, and you can make belts and purses and things. And she says, "I made this belt out of gum wrappers that I collected." Well, at that time, I left the house because I could sense this was a personal, private moment.
Yeah.
Went home, and my dad says, "Your Uncle Lawrence is here." And there were 7 brothers in that family, and Uncle Lawrence was wounded twice in the Korean War and had just gotten out of the hospital. And he came into the room, and my dad says, "He brought you a present." And he was skinny. He's 6 foot, blonde hair. And he just looked frail, tired, just out of the hospital. And he didn't have much money, and I expected Cracker Jacks or something. And he had it behind his back, and he handed it to me, and it was a thing kind of like a book. It was a notebook. And it was red and black, and on the front, there was an Indian picture, and the caption on the bottom was "Little Chief Notebook." And he gave that to me, and I opened it up, and I turned the pages, and they were all blank pages, just blank pages with lines on them. And my uncle says, "You're smart. You can put things in there. You can put your art." He says, "You can put your wise thoughts, and you could write a book. You can put these things in here." And at first, I didn't know what to do with Big Chief Notebook.
Yeah.
But as I looked at the Big Chief Notebook, all of a sudden I realized what a tremendous compliment he gave me. And I put the notebook on my bookshelf in my bedroom and stuff. And I said, "I'm not going to put anything trite or banal in that notebook. It's going to be only things that are worthwhile and lasting." And then as I laid in bed at night, and it was raining and all that stuff, and I laid in bed at night, and I thought of the white belt and the Little Chief Notebook. And I said, "I am never going to be a person that collects chewing gum wrappers to fold into a belt. I'm going to be the kind of a person that is going to have worthwhile things to write in a Little Chief Notebook of my life." And that's what all of us SF guys did. We did something worthwhile. It deserves to be in a special notebook and held for posterity forever.
Sure. And then maybe in that notebook, one of these this is such a fascinating sidebar, again, involving you and Captain Roach, who sometimes you would pick up the mail and drop off the mail. and it's just got to turn to this, then turn you loose on this. But he said, so you picked up the mail, and so one of the afternoons you picked up the mail, you walking back towards the hooch to give it to Captain Roach, or where it would be dropped off if he'd allow you to talk to him. Mm-hmm. And it was written with a German hand, like my grandmother's Hecker's. Without trying to do so, I discovered I held a handwritten letter from Otto Skorzeny to Captain Roach. It was the first of several I would bring. I knew the name. Skorzeny was perhaps the most famous commando of the Second World War. Some said the most famous commando who ever lived. During the war, newspapers said he was the most dangerous man in Europe. Accounts referred to him as the Third Reich Scarlet Pimpernel. Am I saying that right?
Scarlet Pimpernel, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And he was the head of Germany's special forces. Skorzeny considered his specialty to be commando raids and guerrilla warfare. And just like our American Special Green Berets, I was convinced that the German legend was the paradigm of my captain and that he was mentored by him. So talk to us a little bit. You had studied Skorzeny yourself, as we all had. Me and his book.
I read his book. You read his book. Skorzeny was, like I said, the paradigm, or paradigm, not paragon, because he wasn't a pristine character. He's a paragon. But Skorzeny was incredible. He's Hitler's right-hand man. Often you see him next to Hitler in a parade or something like that. He's the one who sprung Mussolini when the Allies captured him and had him in that impregnable fortress
on top of a mountain.
Yes, and he's the one who came in on gliders and stuff. It sprung him and got him out in a little Piper Cub or something like that. He's the one who he was so feared that when Eisenhower, Churchill, and Stalin got together for one of the meetings, the word came out that Skorzeny is in the area, and they spread and just got rid of that meeting. And there was another time where he shot Churchill and killed him, but it turned out it was his double.
Churchill's double.
Yeah. He's the one in Normandy that had a couple of hundred of his paratroopers parachuted in behind the lines and put in false information, turned the signs around, dressed up in American uniforms.
That was in the movie Patton, too.
Yeah.
They saw those guys that were dressed like that. Yeah. And that's the way they operated to slow the advance down.
Yeah. He parachuted into Holland.
I didn't realize there were Skorzeny's people.
Yeah. He's parachuted into Holland. He got the Knight's Cross and 2 Iron Crosses. He was in Russia fighting against the Russians until he got severely wounded. After the war, he was the personal bodyguard for Eva Peron in South America. He is the one who is credited with starting Odessa, the Odessa File,
right? Who
got the Germans out of Germany and into South America. One time he was in Spain, and the Mossad, the Israelis sent some Mossad agents, and as soon as he saw them and figured out who they were, he thought they were there to assassinate him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they said, "Oh, no, we're not here to assassinate you. We want to hire you." He says, "Well, I don't need money, but I'll tell you what, if you get, what's his name, to get the most wanted list."
Simon Wiesenthal.
Simon Wiesenthal, yeah. He says,
who was a big hunter of the Nazis after World War II. He tracked them all over the world.
Yeah.
Tracked them down and brought many to justice. Didn't get them all.
Yeah.
But
well, he told him, if you can get him to get my name off his list, I'll take care of those Russian or those Egyptian scientists who are trying to make the bombs to kill Israel. And so within a month, all the Egyptian scientists were killed. And as I said, at the end of the war, he escaped out of a jail. And they actually think that it was the OSS or the CIA later on who sprung him. And they actually hired him to teach Americans, such as Green Berets, guerrilla warfare. And one of those students is presumed to be my captain Mr. Roach. So when I'm out in the field, I'm listening to Otto Skorzeny and what he would be doing. And the bravado that was out there was incredible.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so when we close this part of the book here, what what was the fate of Captain Roach in terms of his service in country?
Yeah, within a month he was killed. And actually it wasn't in actual combat. He went over a road mine up in your neck of the woods in CCN's area, Monkey Mountain and so forth.
Oh, sure.
And they went over his Jeep went over a road mine, and he was killed in his Jeep. Yeah.
My God, I'll say the same. So after your service, you get out of the Army, or how'd that work? I don't want to be wrong about this. You got out. You're also in the reserves for a bit, but then you also went to Alaska where you got involved in law enforcement, because there's a part of your history here that nobody's known about that I want to get into when you're in law enforcement, and then we can go to your carving and how your spare time you did some authors, writing a couple of other books, which, by the way, while we're speaking about other books, before we have Born Twice, we have The Last White Seal Hunter. We have a book on poetry that, how do you say, haiku?
Haiku.
Flowers in the Grass. Poetry.
Yeah. It's specialized poetry, yeah.
Indeed. And then The Great Catch, Alaskan Short Stories, by a man who lives there and sustained his life and is able to live up there.
And endorsed by a guy named Tilt Meyer.
Is that right?
Yeah, you forgot.
No, I didn't forget. But anyway, so these are 3 books prior to this book. So when you get done with CCC, what's next?
Okay. Joined the 12th Special Forces Group, where I stayed there until Clinton disbanded us.
Right.
I wasn't sure what I was going to do, whether I was going to go back in the service or get out. But I thought in the meantime, I'm going to, no matter what I did, whether it would be go be a farmer or whatever it was, I could always use flying. So I signed up under GI Bill for the ATP, the airline transport, and went to California and was roommate with Mike Buckland, and we both took flight training. We flew gliders and did aerobatics and worked toward our licenses.
And also, this is the same Mike Buckland, just so we remind our viewers that you all went through, was it basic, advanced infantry, special forces training, wind up together, both as intel office, non-commissioned officers, NCOs. Yeah,
and he and I were the only survivors out of our group that went over there. And between the two of us living, we had 4 Purple Hearts.
Well, and then that group, when you left, was how many?
37.
37, and you two are the last 2 who are alive to talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay, just to have a little bit of a flavor here.
Yeah. So anyway, long and short, met my wife.
Kathy?
Yeah, Kathy. Kind of a long story. When my roommate crashed, she came down to visit him in the hospital, and 6 days later, I proposed. I had no idea I was going to do it. But we just decided we didn't want to live in the cities and moved to Alaska.
And you're aware, okay, all right, you moved to Alaska.
Yeah. And I taught martial arts in the college, and all the cops and the state troopers were my students. And it was the academy for the teaching cops and state troopers and so forth. And so they were all my students. And there got to be an opening in the police department. And they said, you got to be a cop. So I took the test and virtually maxed it.
And where in Alaska was this?
This is Sitka, and that's where the school is for teaching cops.
And that's an island?
Yeah, southeast Alaska, an island about 2,000 square miles.
I never think of the east side of Alaska.
Yeah, southeast.
I think about west.
Yeah.
But east.
In the southeast, it's actually a panhandle. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I learned something today.
Yeah. So I wound up being a cop. Went to the academy, and there were 4 categories: academics, shooting, driving. There's one more in there, but anyway, I got
Intel?
No, I can't remember now. Okay. But there were 4.
Yeah.
And I got first in all 4. It's never been done before.
Really?
Yeah. And so anyway, I had a good career ahead. And I arrested. One of my problems was when they swore me to uphold the law, I didn't understand they were joking because I arrested people, and that's not appreciated, But we wound up with. And I don't know how far you want to go into the 5th column.
Well, we definitely got to talk about the 5th column because it impacted you. Yeah. And you're one of the few Green Berets I know who went into police work and was targeted and had assassins come after you in your house in Alaska on a remote island, southeast Alaska.
Yeah.
So we can go into that. We may not want to name the terrorist group per se because they're still there.
Yes.
May have different names, like all good terrorist group. They change their clothing to fool the American public.
Yeah.
To think they're good people when they're not.
Yeah. So anyway, it was my 5th year as a policeman, and there was a fifth group, fifth column, not fifth group.
Yes.
A fifth column. When you have someone trying to infiltrate or take over a country or a base or anything, it would be oftentimes you're surrounded by 4 sides. A fifth column is that which comes up inside of your group.
Like termites in a tree. That
Exactly. And they come up on the inside and they eat you up and they can actually topple you from the inside. And their danger is even worse than that which is attacking you on the outside. And
there's a lot of what we're seeing today in America.
Absolutely. In fact, the word progressive Democrat,
yes,
which is actually socialist, they're socialists.
Of course.
And they want to change the country to socialism and communism. Well, rather than attack from the outside, they work from the inside. And that word means that they are going to do it from other than violent means. They're going to do it politically and so forth. And so in effect, it's a fifth column that's eating away at the United States and destroying our core values and all of that. The fifth column that was in Alaska is like during Vietnam and after. The communists had various fifth columns in the United States as well as any place else. We would do the same. It'd be wonderful you have someone inside the enemy camp who could make it easier for you when you attacked, But one that they had in Alaska was insidious and smart in a way. We have 300 villages and towns, and so many towns, a town of 200, 300, 400 can't have a high school and so forth. They just couldn't do it. So we had regional schools. We had 5 of them spread across the state, and there were regional high schools and so forth. Well,
for the entire state?
Yeah, just 5 in specific places. Sitka was one. You had Anchorage and maybe Dillingham or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, since they were all grouped in 5 places, it would be easy for them to indoctrinate, teach them communist tactics, get them to hate the white man or whatever it would be.
Right.
So they had these 5 locations, and various communist indoctrinated people could teach them, and get them to go against the United States. And I would be wanting to interview a student for something, and I would go into a room, and all the rooms would have posters, 2 foot by 3.5 feet, big posters. Yeah. And the native colors were black and red. And they have these posters all along the walls. And you'd recognize the people. It would be Cochise, Geronimo, Red Cloud, Chief Joseph, and then the next one it would be Mao Zedong, Che Guevara, Stalin.
Whoa.
And the transition was so obvious. And these kids were being taught that the people to identify with were communists. Well, the lady who headed that up, and I won't say her name or anything, one day her common-law husband, they never got married, decided he was going to kill as many people as he could, especially many white people. We had one road going to the mill site where everybody worked, and it was along the ocean, and it was a real windy road. And he parked his car there, and every time a car went up to him, he would walk into the highway with his gun out, pointed at the driver of the car, and then he would stop the car, put his hand out, and stop the car. And as soon as the car would stop, he would motion with his hand for them to get out of the car, and it was very, very clear he was going to execute these people. And in all 8 of these cars, they could just feel what was going to happen, and they would gun the car and take off down the highway, and this guy would shoot at them. And then I was the shift supervisor, and we got a call. I had made an arrest, and I was doing a report in the station. We got a call of a guy in a rust-colored pickup and camper who was shooting at people, and they needed help. He was there now and stopping cars. So I went as fast as the car would go. As a shift supervisor, my car was maroon in color, didn't have the lights on top. You'd have to
all marked.
Lift them. Yeah, I had to put the lights on top.
Machine on top.
Yeah, and so I went as fast as I could go. And when I was approaching him as fast as I could drive, and I'm talking on the radio because of the description, in my mind was an old beat up rusty car, truck, you know.
Yeah.
But the car I saw was a shiny maroon colored pickup, rust colored. And all of a sudden I'm calling on the radio for confirmation. This guy steps out of the car, tries to stop me. He starts to shoot at me, gets a couple shots out. And I stopped my car. I'm left-handed, so I threw my door open with my elbow, and I pointed the gun at him. He's 76 feet away, according to the police report, so
Right.
25 yards. And I yell at him to drop it, and he starts to shoot some more, and I shoot, and he goes straight down. And he goes down on his belly. I can't see the gun anymore. Both of his hands are underneath him. I don't see any blood. And so my first thought is, this guy's faking. So the other cop comes barreling down the highway like a Hollywood movie, as fast as he can go, and slams on the brakes, and the car's skidding sideways. He barrels out with his shotgun. I tell him what happened, you know, and I can't see the gun. I'm concerned he's faking. So with him holding the shotgun and the ambulance on the way, I wait until the ambulance is there, and then we roll him over. He's definitely shot twice in the chest, and we got him off to the station. Within 3 hours, I have hitmen from North Dakota here to kill me.
3 hours?
3 hours on it must have been a private jet or something, because they're in town. And the word in the community is that this poor man was watching the sunrise, and the cops went up and shot him through the window. That's the first word they got out, in spite of all the witnesses and so forth. So anyway, long and short is that he's dead. He died in the hospital and all this stuff. It turns out the person I shot and so forth, his sister, the common law wife, who's heading up the communist thing with indoctrinating kids, and I won't mention the place, but he is the head of an uprising in the Dakotas. He's a very famous man.
Yeah.
He's wealthy, and he's an actor, and he's very, very highly regarded. He sends his people out to kill me. And anyway, long and short is they come to town and all this stuff, and all of a sudden someone explains to them, the guy who did it and that you are supposed to kill was this Green Beret guy. And so long and short was they kind of chicken out,
Right.
and they head off on the plane. They go up toward Anchorage. One of the three gets killed in Anchorage. But for the next year, they have hits on me. They're going to hire people to kill me and all that.
And what were you doing? Because at this point, you had to do, you had your mirror underneath the car every time you got into it. You left the doors open, so if the car explodes with a bomb, a lot of the energy will go out and stay instead of staying in the car and killing you.
Yeah.
And you're living with this, and by this point, you and Kathy are married. You've got a child.
Yep.
And at one point, Kathy was somewhere at a meeting.
Yep.
And you're in your house with your baby, and you're walking across the living room. So please take it from there.
She was she used to help with police scenarios to help train the cops, you know, pretending she's the battered wife or something.
Right,
so she's invited for the graduation for the cops and the troopers. There's 30 some of them across the street from me, you know, across the lawn and the street, and they're in a graduation ceremony about 100 yards away. And she's in there because she's honored because she helped with their training.
Sure.
I'm walking past the window. I've got my baby in my arms. And as I'm walking across the window, my dog barked. And I turned to the side to see what the dog was barking at. And the bullet went over my shoulder where my head would be. It went over my shoulder, missed my baby. And it hit a stained glass seashell that I had in the other window. So when I turned, the stained glass was about where my head would be. The guy, when he shot, thought that stained glass seashell was my head. The bullet went through the stained glass seashell, and I would have run him down. If I didn't have the baby, I would have just bolted out the door, and I would have run that guy down, and I would have ended him.
Right there.
He would have been explaining to God what he was doing. And but I had the baby, so all I could do was crawl across the kitchen to the phone, and all I said was dial 911, and I says, "This is Dale. I just had a hit made on me. They missed me, But I said, the graduation ceremony across the street's about to get out, and my wife is about to walk right through that ambush site. I says, can you let her know? And so they sent a cop, a sergeant over there. He walks down the aisle to whisper to my wife that don't go home that way. They just shot at Dale. And so she, the whole auditorium just happened to notice this guy going. It was that
one of those moments of time where everything stopped.
Yeah, the serendipitous moment,
Yes.
when just as he whispers, they just shot at Dale across the street. When it happened to get quiet, and all the way he whispered, the entire auditorium heard it. And about 70 cops ran out of that building through the woods after this guy as he took off on a full run. And that was the first of many times they tried to shoot or kill me or do a hit on me and so forth. And my wife.
How many other times were you actually shot at by this element?
I don't know. It could have been different because there were hits,
Yes.
contracts.
Sure, yeah.
And most of them fizzled. Most of them would be, they would be shoot from too far away. Where all they had to do is just walk up to me. They could have just done it.
Yeah.
You can't be watching every second,
On the other hand, you may have been preceded by your notoriety as a Green Beret, and they said, we're not going to mess with this guy too close. Let's take him out far away.
Exactly. And that's the biggest thing is they were a little bit leery of the target. And the other thing is I acted at ease all the time. I didn't act afraid. I didn't take any unique things. And so they were hitting a target that was totally confident in himself.
Sure.
And it kind of unnerved him and stopped him. But it was dangerous for a long time. I would get invited to go snowmobiling from a guy I hardly knew. You probably really, crazy.
Indeed. Well, also, there's a classic moment here. Apparently, I don't know if it was this incident or another incident where you shot somebody with 2 rounds.
This guy, yeah.
This is that case?
It's that case.
Okay, but then you got to tell our listeners what your wife Kathy's.
My wife is so good. We're both Christian. We don't get afraid that much. And it was like 7 a.m. when the gunfight happened.
Right.
And he's down. As soon as I get to the station, which takes an hour or two.
Yes.
Yeah. So I go to the station, and I thought, before the word gets out and my wife hears it on a radio or something, I need to call her and tell her what happened. And so I called the house and I said, Kath, I don't want you to worry. I says, but last night I had to kill somebody. And she had heard already. And she says, I just got one question. How come it took you 2 shots? And that's a wife.
That's a wife that stands by her man.
Absolutely,
And even the worst conditions is critical of using extra ammo. We should have had one.
Yeah. Well, she was kind of criticizing I might have missed once,
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're close to that point for our second interview here. Any final notes? And before we ask that question, before we get your answer again, we're here for SOGCast 33 and 34 off of this book, an excellent book, Born Again by Dale Hanson. He also has written The Great Catch, Haiku, a book of poetry endorsed by a fellow Green Beret, and The Last White Seal Hunter. I haven't had a chance to read these yet, but now that they're so close by, and my daughter recommends them highly.
Yeah.
Of course, but
Great.
So we're at that point, sir, for any last thoughts or anything we should have covered or something you'd like to say besides that you married up and had a classy woman, 3 children.
Yeah.
Oh, talk a little bit about your carving.
Oh.
Last but not least.
Yeah. When people were shooting at me and all that stuff, people were also afraid to hire me for a job. The police department said I was politically hot, should look for work, and people were afraid to hire me, thinking their businesses would be sabotaged. So anyway, long and short was I had done some carving, and it's almost like the hand of God was in it. I was carving a soapstone piece, and one of the great painters of Alaska, Keith Greba, came by, and he stopped by my house, and he said, that's worth about $1,200. And I never thought of putting a value on
What
anything
kind of
I did.
carving was it?
It was a seal. I was carving for my wife out of soapstone.
Okay.
And he said it's worth a lot of money. Well, later on in the week, I was carving a whale out of ivory. Don't remember where I got the ivory, but I was carving it with crude tools. Didn't even have a base for it yet. And he said, that's worth a lot of money. And he came by, toward the end, and he says, let me take that. And he went downtown. He came back in an hour, gave me a check for $200. Said a store had already bought it. And then he called me up on the phone that night to say that the store had already sold it for $400. And then I thought, man, this is really weird. I never thought anyone would value what I did. And then a third thing happened that week. It was that the best carver in Alaska stopped by my house. I knew who he was. I knew his name. Never met him, though. And he had one of those huge lard cans, those old-fashioned square lard cans full of scraps of ivory. And he says, my name is Jim Fleshman. He says, I'm coming over here, and I want you to pick out what you want out of this ivory. And so I picked out what I dared to carve that would be labor-intensive rather than material. And so I picked everything I dared. He says, well, you're going to need some accents and this and that, too. And then when he figured I had everything I wanted, he took his big arm and he just took what I didn't want and he put it back in his bucket and started heading for my door. I says, how much do I owe you for this? And he looked at me. He says, nothing. God told me to bring it over here.
Really?
Yes. And so I told my wife, with three things like that in 1 week, I said, there's something to this. And I told my wife, I says, but I'm not going to be a peddler. I says, if I'm going to do this and nobody's going to hire me and all this, I'm going to give it an honest shot. And I said, I'm going to faithfully carve every day. And I carved till 1, 2, 3 in the morning every single day. And I said, when spring gets here, I'm going to have an inventory. And I did. I carved all winter long. And when spring came, I invited all the store owners that had a tourist type thing over to my house. It was at 10 o'clock. At noon, there wasn't a single carving left on the table. And I had orders for 450 more carvings.
Whoa.
And it was like that for more than the next 20 years.
So you literally carved out a new career.
Yeah, literally. So for at least 40 years, I've been carving. I've done 17,000 carvings. And then I've got about 250, 300 editions of bronze and silver and pewter and all the rest that I do too. So in the meantime, that's how we supported ourselves, carving and writing books for Tiltmeyer.
Indeed. And you could literally say that you've been, aside from carving out a career in your life, you're the epitome of the Special Forces soldier who, in Alaska, where you want to be, people won't hire you.
Yeah.
And you had a new career in carving. It's just
and the
amazing.
beautiful thing about that was this, as a soldier or as a policeman or something else, you really have no control of the end, how it's going to turn out.
Oh, yeah.
But when I pick up a piece of ivory or stone or wood or whatever, I'm in charge and I determine how it's going to end. And there's something gratifying, satisfying with saying that, there's something here I can control. Like when you finish the book and you've gone over it 10, 12 times and it's edited and all this stuff, and you just say, I'm satisfied with this book. It says what I wanted to say. That's nice because you control the end of it, and there's Plato, Aristotle's teacher.
Indeed.
He said something, we can forgive a child who's afraid of the dark. We can forgive a child who's afraid of the dark. But how awful it is when you see an adult who's afraid of the light.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so many of us today, we look at the world around us and all this kind of a thing, and we're terrified when we ought to be in charge of it and do our part to make things work and happen.
Have faith.
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed. Well, any other last thoughts,
That's
sir,
it.
before we wrap it up here officially? Well, in that case, we want to thank Jocko Willing Productions for making this possible in conjunction with SOG Chronicles, and for Jocko's team, Echo Charles. And today we've been joined by Tech Tom, our top secret agent here, to help make these productions come to you. And then we also we want to thank the men and women who have served our country in the years past, and men like Dale Hanson, who has served our country with great valor. And we also remember and salute the men and the women of our military, the Border Patrol, law enforcement, first responders, EMT, and these days our law enforcement in particular and Border Patrol on the southern and northern borders that are just under incredible pressure. We thank all of them. And last but not least, we also remember the men and women who did not return from Vietnam. Today, from the Vietnam War, there are 1,581 Americans listed as missing in action or not been repatriated. And of that, 50 Green Berets from the Secret War are amongst that number. From Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam, the remains are still there. And the way our government's gone, they'll never be brought home, sad to say. Mm-hmm. And also, we add that we documented 83 aviators who were amongst that 1,581 who died in support of SOG men on the ground like Dale Hanson and the recon teams during the 8-year secret war in Vietnam. God bless America.
Amen.
Amen. Welcome back to SOGCast number 34. I'm joined by Tech Tom, our top secret agent here, who we cannot identify at this time formally, but has been a critical player on the Jocko Willink SOGCast, SOG Chronicles team. And welcome back from travels afar, and welcome to SOGCast number 34.
Feels like forever since I've been sitting in this chair and forgetting what to say now.
We haven't done this last year.
Whew, yeah. It's literally
we're rolling again now.
Yeah, we are definitely rolling again, and it's great to be back and
good to
listening.
have you back.
Yeah, listening to these stories and listening to Dale talk. I mean, yeah, like Ford Drum had no clue, and I grew up reading everything and anything, as you know, I could ever find on the Vietnam War, and never saw anything about anything Ford Drum related. So
that makes two. I was in SOG, and
how did you not know?
1 and 4, and we never heard a word. It was so productive.
Yeah,
and I think it's a classic example of the less people who know, except for the guys that are doing it and turn over the intel, the better.
Yes,
the classic example of a great intel operation. I'm not sure who came up with it. I wonder if Heine Alderbach came out with that.
That was
Ardnot. Yes.
Thinking about being that low in an aircraft flying through trees, tipped on your side.
Yeah, and 3 or 4 barf bags in one day. I mean, just
I can still see him throwing it out though, right back hitting you in the face. Because
I think we've all experienced.
I think we've experienced it at one time or another on possibly on helicopters.
Yeah. Well, we had those little bird dogs, and at some point, they just got you.
That's unreal. And then, I don't know about setting up a RON site on Ho Chi Minh Trail.
I know.
I'm trying to think. Typically, you look for that hideaway spot where nobody's going to go, not the interstate.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, just that part of the book. When I'm reading, I'm sitting there with my jaws on the floor, going like, "You did what? You and Captain Roach did what?"
Oh my God!
And you waited, and you lived to talk about it. And maybe others that were on the trail that had severe consequences, but in this case, they just did it, and they took the fight to the NVA.
Well, who else did that though? You guys were wiretapping it and sitting on next to it,
next to the trail.
Yeah,
we weren't.
You weren't on it.
We crossed it, and when we had to do our E&E, we crossed it again. But we weren't on it.
You weren't on it.
Trust me.
They were just like they're at a fork in the road and go, "Let's go in the V." That's a good spot.
Yeah, even his recon days, I think Dale would have said, we try to stay away from the trails. We may have to cross them or ambush, get a good ambush. And there's great stories from SOGCast 33 on some of those ambushes that they pulled off.
Yeah, and the one in
Amazing.
the brush when they're lined up and the deer come through, it's like, the whole time I'm sitting here listening to that, and I'm listening to like, oh, they're pushing them, and I've done hunting in the past, and it's like we've driven deer. Very similar situation, but usually you have radios, so you're communicating with your guys, so you know where they are, and they weren't communicating. It didn't sound like, at least. I don't know. Obviously for obvious reasons, they don't want to come up on a radio and get found, so they didn't want to let the enemy know. But it's like, how far did you know your people were going to be? Because that's like, I mean, you had to wait until those enemy broke through the brush and you could actually identify them as, oh, yep, that's a bad guy. I'm going to go ahead and now we're going to do this.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, you still don't know how far back your guys are, how far your round's going to go through that brush. You know, hopefully they stopped early enough that they, you know, and had a plan. But, you know, I didn't hear that. So I was wondering, I was like, oh my God, like, that's like the most dangerous thing I could. That was like a Polish ambush, what we used to call. You know, you line up on this side of the road, this side ends up on this side of the road, and the enemy walks between you, shoot. Yeah. I don't know if I could say that anymore now. I get in trouble.
Right, there'd be 2 or 3 dead and many friendly.
Many friendly, yeah. But yeah, I mean, trying to take pictures and hold a CAR-15 out of a window of a plane.
I know. But John Plaster and other guys like Pat Watkins, Spider Parks, that have flown Covey, all at some point when they're Covey riders, open fire in their 02 or 01 with a CAR-15 or an M79.
But they weren't taking pictures.
They weren't taking pictures.
At the same time.
Indeed.
and trying to hold a barf bag.
Barf bag. That's the first time I've heard a story about troops dining courtesy of the NVA.
Yeah.
They chased them the hell out of camp and ate their food.
They're like,
it doesn't
look,
get any better than that.
Dinner.
And then Dale has a cover story with the Nook Mom for their bad breath.
So they blend in better.
Yeah.
I can't believe I don't know, those 2 South Vietnamese officers that were on the radio.
Oh, yeah.
You had utmost restraint in that one because I think both of them would have ended up with a round in their head at that point. Once someone told me what they were saying, it would have been over. They wouldn't have found them. Well,
you're an Afghanistan vet and been to Iraq a little bit. You understand some of the questionable politics that we encounter.
It's insane how that works, but it's the way that would have went down. I think it would have just been a quick, you know. I don't know what happened to them. They were standing there. They walked off.
Somehow they walked into this bullet that's just flying through the air.
The jungle was there, and it ate them. You know, I mean, no one could ever say anything because how are you going to find them?
Indeed.
We got, 1,581 of them over there that we can't find. So if we can't find them, nobody's going to find those 2.
Yeah. Well, this is the second SOGCast we've had 2 back-to-back interviews.
Yeah.
The first with Lynn Black.
Yep.
With episodes 27 and 28. And this is just moving forward. I think the book is compelling with the stories and unique insights into SOG.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to get that one and his other ones. So I'm going to pick up all of Dale's books now.
And then that book will be coming out as an audiobook soon. And that will be available as an audiobook, finally. Because now the book's been out for several months. And we can move along. A thing called progress.
So what was it? How long is that audiobook? How long is the book? Like when you read it? 15 hours?
15 hours.
So when I listen to the book, it's going to take me 15 hours to go through it?
It'll be good when you drive to Wisconsin.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to get that, and we're going to listen to it as a family going up to Wisconsin.
Well, any other closing thoughts from you, casual observer?
No, just another wonderful story from, you know, the heroes that were there, that weren't there, but were there. And, you know, the things you guys did were amazing. And that the fact that we had a command back then that wasn't so risk adverse is you know, that's refreshing to see that we used to be that way. So
a lot of the World War II guys were still around. Jack Singlab.
Yeah.
Jack Singlab. And we had 5 of the chief SOGs that ran SOG, and they were all World War II vets.
Yeah.
And they seen it. They seen the elephant many a times.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I look forward to reading the book, listening to audiobook, and reading the other books that Dale has written. So I think it'll be a great time.
All right. Well, we thank Dale again, and we thank Jocko Willing Productions, Echo Charles, and his team. And again today for Tech Tom joining us. And we appreciate the sponsorship. We encourage everybody to go to Jocko Willing's website. You just Google Jocko for books, programs. You can Google SOG Chronicles for my books, and any of these podcasts that have been produced already, they're listed there. And with any inquiries, there's always an email address. And we're available on Instagram and Facebook ever thinking about Twitter now that we got a man who really is representing,
opening.
Welcome to both sides of the political pendulum.
Yeah.
Again, thank you again. God bless America. Until next time.